Six-figure promotion turns into revenge after exposing my wife's affair with the CEO. I've always believed that hard work pays off, and for a while, that's exactly what was happening in my life. After years of grinding, I was finally rewarded with a six-figure promotion. It was the kind of break I had been working toward for as long as I could remember. This promotion meant everything to me. Not just the money, but the recognition, the feeling of finally achieving what I had been striving for. My wife, Sarah, had always supported my career goals, or so I thought. It all changed one night when I got home late from work. My phone had been blowing up with congratulations all day, and I couldn't wait to share the excitement with Sarah. But the moment I walked through the door, I felt something was off. The usual smile she gave me when I came home wasn't there. Instead, she was distracted, avoiding eye contact as I shared the good news. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Rather than being happy for me, she seemed agitated. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself that she was just having a bad day, that she'd come around. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Little did I know, this promotion would reveal things about my marriage that I wasn't prepared for. A few weeks passed, and the tension between Sarah and me only grew. I couldn't figure out what had changed. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush it off, say she was tired, or that work was stressing her out. But I knew something else was going on. She'd been spending more time out of the house, saying she had errands to run or meetings that didn't add up. When she'd come home, she wouldn't even look at me the same way. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late at the office, trying to catch up on some paperwork when I got a text from a coworker. It was a random message, asking if I was aware that Sarah had been seen with our company's CEO, Mark. I froze. Mark was a charismatic guy, someone who had always seemed friendly, but also someone I'd never really trusted. Something about the way he carried himself, too smooth, too calculated. I told myself it couldn't be true, but the more I thought about it, the more things started to fall into place. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the growing distance between us. My stomach twisted as I pieced together the signs I had been ignoring. That night, instead of confronting Sarah, I decided to follow her the next time she said she was heading out for errands. I needed to know for sure if my worst suspicions were true. The betrayal I was feeling was already starting to creep in, but I wasn't ready to confront her without solid proof. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Why him? I didn't sleep much that night. All I could think about was what I was about to find out and how it would destroy the life we had built together. The next day, Sarah left the house around noon, claiming she had an afternoon meeting across town. I told her I'd be busy with work all day, but in reality, I was watching her every move. I waited a few minutes after she left, then I grabbed my keys and followed her. My heart pounded in my chest as I tailed her car through the streets. The whole time, I was trying to convince myself that I was wrong, that she wouldn't do this to me. But deep down, I already knew the truth. She didn't drive to an office building or any place that would suggest a work meeting. Instead, she pulled up to a hotel. My stomach dropped. I parked a few spots away, hoping she wouldn't notice me. My hands shook as I watched her get out of the car and casually walk inside. A few minutes later, Mark, my CEO, showed up. He parked his sleek car like he had no care in the world and walked into the hotel with the confidence of a man who had everything he wanted. I sat there in shock, watching my wife disappear into a hotel with my boss, the man I had looked up to for years, the one I had trusted with my career. My thoughts raced. How long had this been going on? What had I missed? I felt a mix of rage, betrayal, and disbelief, but I knew I couldn't just sit there. I needed proof. If this was really happening, I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my phone and stepped out of the car. I marched toward the hotel, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't have a plan, but I wasn't going to let them get away with this. As I approached the front desk, I saw the clerk glance at me, sensing the storm brewing inside. I asked for their room number, but of course, they wouldn't give it to me. That didn't stop me, though. I pulled out my phone, dialed Sarah's number, and waited. It rang once, then twice, before going straight to voicemail. I clenched my jaw. She was ignoring me, probably in the middle of something that would destroy me. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stood there in the lobby, staring at my phone, trying to control the rage boiling inside me. I had never felt this kind of anger before, this mix of betrayal and helplessness. I couldn't just leave. I wasn't going to walk away from this without making sure they both paid for what they were doing. I made my way back outside, trying to gather my thoughts. Then an idea struck me. If I couldn't confront them inside, I could still expose them. I needed proof, solid proof that no one could deny. I didn't know exactly how, but I was going to make sure they both regretted every second of this affair. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, waiting. Hours passed, and my mind ran wild with images of what was happening in that hotel room. Every second that ticked by felt like a knife, twisting deeper into my gut. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, they emerged. First, it was Sarah, looking around nervously like she was afraid someone might see her. She quickly walked to her car, keeping her head down. A minute later, Mark strolled out, his arrogance on full display, acting like nothing in the world could touch him. Watching him walk so casually after what they had done, I knew I couldn't let this slide. I snapped a few photos of them leaving the hotel separately. It wasn't the confrontation I had imagined, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, I didn't say a word to Sarah. I acted like everything was normal, but inside, I was planning my next move. She didn't suspect a thing. She still thought she had me fooled, and that was going to be her downfall. I wasn't just going to expose her affair. I was going to make sure they both paid for this betrayal. The next morning, I started gathering everything I needed. Bank records, phone bills, old messages. I wanted it all. I was going to build a case so undeniable that neither of them would have anywhere to hide. But that wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something that would ruin them both publicly. I spent the next few days piecing together everything I could find. Every late-night text, every unexplained charge on our credit card, every phone call that didn't make sense. It was like looking at a puzzle that I'd been too blind to see before. With each piece, the picture became clearer. They had been seeing each other for months, right under my nose. The lies Sarah had told me, the deceit. It all added up, and my anger grew with every new discovery. But I wasn't just angry. I was determined. They thought they could walk all over me, that I would just take it, keep my head down like nothing was happening. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The more I uncovered, the more focused I became. I wasn't going to confront her with a screaming match or some dramatic scene. No, that was too easy. I was going to hit them where it hurt. I called a lawyer, set the wheels in motion for a divorce, and planned my revenge. But there was still one thing left to do: expose them publicly. Sarah was still in the dark, acting like everything was fine. And Mark, well, he probably thought he was untouchable, but I was about to bring him down from his pedestal. A week later, our company held a large corporate event, one where everyone, including Mark and Sarah, would be attending. I knew this was my chance. This was where I would make my move. I was calm, more focused than I had ever been, and ready to bring everything to light. That evening, I arrived at the event, dressed in my best suit, with all the evidence I needed stored on my phone. Photos, messages, everything was ready to go. As soon as I saw Mark and Sarah, I felt the blood rush to my head, but I kept my cool. They didn't suspect a thing. The night dragged on, but I waited for the perfect moment. When Mark got on stage to deliver his speech, I knew it was time. As he spoke about leadership and integrity, I fought back the urge to laugh. What a joke. I stood there, watching Mark bask in the applause of the room, his arrogance on full display as he talked about values like loyalty and commitment. The hypocrisy made my blood boil, but I kept my face expressionless. I knew what was coming next, and I was ready for it. As soon as Mark finished his speech and the applause began to die down, I made my move. I walked up to the microphone, interrupting the host who was about to introduce the next speaker. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on me. I could see Mark and Sarah in the audience, both looking confused but not yet suspicious. I took a deep breath, and with a calmness I didn't know I had, I began to speak. I've worked for this company for years, and I've always believed in loyalty and honesty. But what happens when those we trust the most betray us? There was a ripple of murmurs throughout the room. I could see Mark shift uncomfortably in his seat, his smile fading as he realized something wasn't right. I continued. What happens when the person you share your life with, the person you trust with your future, turns out to be lying to your face? Turns out to be sharing more than just a professional relationship with the CEO? The room went dead silent. Sarah's face turned pale, and Mark's expression shifted from confusion to panic. I could feel the tension thickening in the room as people started to glance around, trying to make sense of what was happening. And I have proof, I said, holding up my phone for everyone to see. Messages, photos, everything. So, if anyone here doubts what I'm saying, feel free to take a look. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Sarah's eyes were wide with shock, and I could see her trying to mouth something to me, but I wasn't listening. Mark looked like he wanted to bolt from the room, but he was trapped in the spotlight, his carefully curated reputation crumbling in front of everyone. You both thought you could do this behind my back and get away with it, I said, looking directly at them. But not anymore. This ends here. The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on me, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Sarah was frozen in her seat, her face drained of color. Mark, usually so composed and confident, looked like he had just been punched in the gut. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make, and I wasn't leaving until they both felt the full impact of what they had done. I held up my phone again, this time showing the screen to the crowd. Here's everything, I said, my voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. Months of lies, texts between them, photos from hotel rooms, dinners. This is what betrayal looks like. I began scrolling through the images, one by one, making sure everyone could see. The room was dead silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The smugness that used to radiate off Mark was completely gone, replaced by pure fear. He knew his career, his reputation, everything, was about to come crashing down. The crowd gasped as I scrolled through a particularly damning message exchange, one where they openly joked about keeping their affair a secret from me. It was then that the whispers started. People began murmuring to each other, their shock and disbelief slowly giving way to anger and disgust. I turned back to the audience. This is the man who's supposed to be our leader, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. This is the man who talks about integrity and leadership. And this, I paused, gesturing to Sarah, who still sat frozen in her chair. This is the woman I gave my life to. I took a deep breath. But that ends tonight. Mark, Sarah, I hope you're ready to face the consequences, because from this moment on, your lies are over. I've already filed for divorce. And as for you, Mark, I'll be making sure the board knows exactly what kind of man you are. The crowd was buzzing now, the reality of the situation sinking in. People were staring at Mark with disgust, some shaking their heads, others whispering furiously. Mark stood up suddenly, trying to save face, but it was too late. I walked off the stage, leaving them both in the mess they created, knowing that from this moment on, their lives would never be the same. As I walked off the stage, I could feel the stares of the crowd following me, the room buzzing with a mixture of shock, anger, and curiosity. Behind me, I heard Mark stammering into the microphone, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, but it was futile. The damage was done. He could try to spin it all he wanted, but the proof I had just presented was irrefutable. There was no coming back from this. I didn't even glance at Sarah as I passed her. I knew she was reeling, probably trying to process everything that had just happened. Part of me wanted to stop, to say something to her, to demand an explanation. But what was the point? Her lies had already spoken louder than anything she could say now. The marriage we had, the life we shared, it was all over, and there was no saving it. As I exited the building, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the first step towards something new, something better. I had taken back control. I had exposed the truth, and now they would both have to deal with the consequences. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past me as I replayed the night's events in my mind. I wasn't sure what the next few days would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change, and this time, it would be on my terms. The next morning, the fallout began. News spread like wildfire through the office. Mark's reputation, once untouchable, was in shambles. Word got to the board quickly, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they took action. The whispers had turned into open conversations, and people were furious. A leader like Mark, someone who had always preached integrity, was now exposed as a liar and a hypocrite. Sarah, on the other hand, hadn't contacted me at all. She must have known that there was nothing left to say. I filed for divorce officially, making sure every detail of her affair was noted in the paperwork. I wanted her to feel the weight of her decisions, just like I had when I found out. But revenge isn't just about taking something away from someone. It's about making sure you rise stronger after the fall. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The days that followed were a whirlwind of consequences for both Sarah and Mark. I made sure the evidence of their affair didn't stay buried in the company's gossip circles. It wasn't long before Mark's misconduct became a full-blown scandal. The board of directors wasted no time. Within a week, an internal investigation was launched, and Mark was suspended. His days as CEO were numbered, and he knew it. For Sarah, things unraveled just as quickly. Mutual friends started distancing themselves, and word spread through our social circle. Some people reached out, expressing their shock and disappointment in what she had done. Others just cut ties completely. But I didn't care about her fallout. This was the bed she made, and now she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, I was focused on moving forward. The divorce process was underway, and I had already packed up my things, leaving the house we once shared. Staying there any longer would have been unbearable. Every corner of that house held memories, but now they were tainted by her betrayal. I couldn't live in the past anymore. Instead, I threw myself into work. The promotion I had earned, ironically, the very thing that had set off this chain of events, became my escape. I poured everything I had into my new role, determined to rise above the mess they had created. I wasn't going to let this break me. If anything, I was more motivated than ever to prove that I didn't need Sarah or anyone else to succeed. But despite the satisfaction of seeing them face the consequences, there was still a heaviness inside me that I couldn't shake. Revenge had given me a momentary high, but the pain of betrayal still lingered. Some nights, I found myself lying awake, replaying everything in my mind, wondering how I could have missed the signs. I had trusted Sarah completely. We had built a life together, or at least I thought we had. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was realizing that the person I thought she was never really existed. The Sarah I had loved was a lie, a mask she wore while hiding her affair. And coming to terms with that left me feeling more hollow than I expected. But I couldn't let myself dwell on that emptiness for long. I had already taken the first steps to rebuild my life, and there was no turning back now. I had gotten my revenge, and now it was time to focus on something much more important, my own happiness. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of triumph watching Mark's empire crumble around him. The company didn't waste any time after their investigation, and he was forced to resign. His name was dragged through the mud, and I heard whispers about his marriage falling apart as well. He had lost everything, and while part of me reveled in that fact, it didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. Sarah, too, had become a ghost of her former self. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was staying with a friend, isolated and ashamed of what she had done. I hadn't spoken to her since the night of the corporate event, and frankly, I didn't want to. Our divorce proceedings were quick and straightforward, given the evidence I had. There wasn't much for her to fight over, and she knew it. It was over in a matter of weeks, and just like that, the life we had built together was officially over. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel the void left behind. Revenge had felt good, satisfying, even, but it wasn't healing. The nights alone in my new apartment, away from the life we had shared, were the hardest. It wasn't Sarah I missed, it was the life I thought we had. The comfort, the security, the idea that I was building a future with someone who had my back. Now that was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But slowly, piece by piece, I did. I started going out again, reconnecting with friends I had drifted from, and even taking up hobbies I had neglected during my marriage. It felt strange at first, living a life that wasn't tied to Sarah or the routine we had built, but it was also freeing. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by someone else's expectations or needs. This was my time to rebuild, on my own terms. One night, as I sat in my apartment looking out over the city skyline, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't just been about them. It was about reclaiming control over my life, about not letting their betrayal define me. I had done that. Now, it was time to move on, to truly let go of the anger and pain that had driven me for so long. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next, with or without anyone by my side. As the months went by, I found myself adjusting to my new life. The sense of betrayal that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. I had started to rebuild, both personally and professionally, and I was beginning to feel the weight of Sarah's betrayal lift off my shoulders. Work had become my refuge. The six-figure promotion I'd earned was no longer overshadowed by the scandal surrounding Mark and Sarah. With Mark out of the picture, the company had turned to me to help stabilize things, and I found myself stepping into a bigger role than I had ever anticipated. I was thriving, not because I needed to prove something to anyone, but because I had rediscovered my drive. My success wasn't tied to revenge anymore. It was about me, my future, and what I wanted. Outside of work, I started focusing on the things that made me happy. I traveled more, something Sarah and I had always talked about but never really did. I took spontaneous trips, explored places I had always wanted to visit, and met new people along the way. Each trip felt like a step closer to reclaiming the parts of myself that had been buried in the ruins of our marriage. There were still moments, though, moments when the loneliness crept in, and I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. It was hard to let go of the anger completely. Some nights, I still thought about confronting Sarah one last time, demanding answers that I knew I'd never get. But then I reminded myself that I didn't need them anymore. Knowing why wouldn't change what had happened, and it certainly wouldn't change the future I was building for myself. One evening, while out with some friends, I bumped into an old acquaintance, Emily, someone I hadn't seen since before Sarah and I got married. We started talking, and before I knew it, we had spent the whole night catching up. It felt easy, natural, like no time had passed at all. She had heard about what happened with Sarah. Of course, everyone had, but she didn't bring it up. Instead, we talked about life, about how things had changed for both of us, and it felt nice. There was no pressure, no baggage, just two people reconnecting. After that night, Emily and I started seeing each other more often. I wasn't rushing into anything, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a chance to rebuild something new with someone who actually cared. I wasn't sure where things would go with her, but I was open to finding out. The journey of rebuilding wasn't over, but I was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, the future looked brighter than I had imagined. As things progressed with Emily, I started to feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time: happiness. It wasn't forced, like trying to convince myself that everything was fine with Sarah. This was real, and it came naturally. I found myself looking forward to our time together, whether it was grabbing a casual dinner or just talking about life. She didn't make me feel like I had to prove anything. There was no judgment, no baggage from the past hanging over us. It was refreshing. But even as I was moving forward, I still had to deal with the remnants of the life I'd left behind. One day, out of the blue, Sarah reached out. It was the first time I'd heard from her since the divorce had been finalized. Her message was short, almost apologetic, but it was clear she wanted to talk. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her in the past where she belonged. But another part of me, the part that still craved answers, was curious. I had spent so many nights wondering what she could possibly say for herself, and now she was finally reaching out. Maybe this was my chance to hear her side, or maybe it was just a way for me to finally close that chapter of my life for good. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We met at a small cafe downtown, and as soon as I walked in, I felt the old wounds start to reopen. Sarah looked different. She seemed tired, worn down by the consequences of her choices. She smiled weakly when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, filled with all the things that had gone unsaid for so long. Finally, she spoke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began, her voice shaky. "But I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am for everything." I listened, waiting for her to continue. Part of me wanted to hear her grovel, to admit how much she had ruined both of our lives. But another part of me realized I didn't need that anymore. Her apology, while necessary, didn't have the power over me that it once might have. I had already moved on, even if she hadn't. Sarah went on to explain how things had fallen apart between her and Mark after everything came to light. Their affair, which had seemed so thrilling to her at the time, quickly turned into a nightmare once the truth was exposed. Mark had lost his job, and she had been left to deal with the fallout alone. She had no one left, no friends, no support. She was a shell of the person she used to be. "I just wanted you to know how much I regret what I did," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I can never take it back, but I wish I could." I nodded, taking in her words, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Her regret was hers to carry, not mine. I didn't need her apology to move on, and I didn't need to forgive her to find peace. "I'm glad you said that, Sarah," I finally replied, my voice calm. "But I've already made peace with what happened. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." She looked at me, a mixture of relief and sadness on her face. She had wanted closure, but I had already found mine. We parted ways that day, and as I walked away from the cafe, I felt lighter. I had let go of the last bit of the anger I'd been carrying. Sarah's apology wasn't what freed me. I had freed myself long before that. My future was finally mine to rebuild, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Walking away from that cafe felt like closing a door that had been left ajar for far too long. The chapter of my life with Sarah was finally behind me, and as I left that cafe, I realized something important. I didn't need closure from her. I had already found it in myself. Her apology was just a formality, a final note on a story that had ended the moment I chose to reclaim my life. With that weight lifted, I allowed myself to focus on the present. My relationship with Emily had grown stronger over the past few months. We weren't rushing into anything, but we were enjoying the process of getting to know each other without the baggage of past relationships clouding our time together. It felt new, fresh, and, most importantly, real. We spent our time doing things I hadn't done in years, exploring new restaurants, going on spontaneous weekend getaways, or just spending quiet evenings at home. It was effortless, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Emily made me feel seen, appreciated, and respected in ways I hadn't felt in years. But as much as things were going well between us, I knew I had to be careful. I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into something serious just yet. I had learned my lesson from my marriage with Sarah, and I didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. Emily understood that. She wasn't pushing me for more than I was ready to give, and that made all the difference. It allowed us to build something based on trust and mutual respect, rather than desperation or fear of being alone. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful look. "You know," she said softly, "I'm really proud of how far you've come." I looked at her, surprised by the sudden comment. "What do you mean?" I asked. She smiled. "I know what you went through wasn't easy. A lot of people would have let it destroy them, but you didn't. You came out of it stronger, and you didn't let the past control you." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For so long, I had been so focused on moving forward, on surviving the storm of betrayal, that I hadn't stopped to recognize how far I had actually come. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And, most importantly, I hadn't let Sarah's betrayal define me. "You're right," I said quietly, realizing the truth in her words. "I guess I never really thought about it like that." Emily leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't let it harden you. It's easy to become bitter after something like that." I wrapped my arm around her, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "I guess I had to figure out who I was without all of it," I admitted. "Without the anger, without Sarah, just me." She smiled, lifting her head to look at me. "And who are you now?" I thought about it for a moment, then smiled back. "Someone who's ready to live again." It wasn't just words. I meant it. I had finally let go of the past and was ready to embrace whatever the future had in store for me. As time went on, I settled into this new version of my life, one that wasn't defined by the betrayal of my past, but by the opportunities of the present. I found myself smiling more, feeling lighter, and actually excited for what was to come. Work was thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my future. I had earned my promotion through hard work and determination, and with Mark gone, the company had shifted in a positive direction. The cloud of scandal had lifted, and I was leading a team that respected me not only for my work ethic, but for how I had handled everything that had happened. Emily and I grew closer with each passing week. She brought a calm into my life that I hadn't realized I needed. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me that life was about more than just success or getting revenge. It was about living fully, embracing every moment for what it was. We took long drives to the coast, spent lazy Sundays watching old movies, and just enjoyed the simple pleasure of each other's company. It was the kind of relationship I never had with Sarah, the kind that felt honest and real. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a serious expression on her face. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "About us." My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't had any deep conversations about the future yet, but I knew this moment would come eventually. I braced myself, not knowing what to expect. "I don't want to rush things," she continued, her voice steady but gentle. "But I just want you to know that I'm here for the long haul. I know you've been through a lot, and I don't expect anything from you, but I just want to be open about how I feel." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. No one had ever been this direct with me in such an honest and thoughtful way. I appreciated her honesty, and in that moment, I knew how much I had grown. A year ago, I would have been afraid to hear those words, but now I felt ready. I reached out, taking her hand. "Emily, I've been thinking about us too," I said, my voice filled with sincerity. "I know I've been cautious, but you've been nothing but patient with me, and that means more than you know." She smiled softly, and I could see the relief in her eyes. "I don't want to rush anything either," I continued, "but I want you to know that I see a future with you. A real one." The look of happiness that spread across her face was something I hadn't seen in years, not since I thought Sarah and I had been building our future together. But this felt different. This felt real. For the first time, I realized that I was capable of building something new, something better. I didn't need to rush into anything, but I also didn't need to hold back out of fear. What Emily and I had was special, and I was ready to see where it could go. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. It wasn't just about getting over the past anymore. It was about embracing the future and realizing that I deserved happiness, just like anyone else. As the weeks turned into months, life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emily and I grew closer, not just as a couple, but as partners navigating this new chapter of life together. We took things at our own pace, savoring the journey rather than rushing to the finish line. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living, each day bringing new experiences, new joys, and a deeper connection to the person I was becoming. Work remained steady, and I found myself thriving in my leadership role. The respect I had earned from my colleagues only grew, and with Mark out of the picture, the company had entered a new era of growth. I was proud of what I had accomplished, not just professionally but personally. I had managed to turn what could have been a devastating experience into something that fueled my resilience and strength. Emily and I began to talk more openly about the future, where we wanted to go, what we wanted to achieve both individually and together. There was no pressure, no urgency, just a mutual understanding that we were building something meaningful. It wasn't about erasing the past, but rather creating a future that was shaped by the lessons we had learned. One evening, as we sat in my apartment, I reflected on how far I had come. A year ago, my life had been in ruins, my marriage shattered, my trust betrayed, and my future uncertain. Now, I was sitting next to a woman who supported me in ways I never thought possible, in a life that was filled with possibilities. "I never thought I'd get to this place," I admitted to Emily, breaking the comfortable silence. "After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd be able to trust anyone again. I didn't think I'd be happy. Emily smiled softly, reaching for my hand. You deserve this, she said. You've worked hard for it. And you're not the same person you were back then. You've grown. She was right. The man I had been during my marriage to Sarah, the one who had ignored the warning signs, who had let himself be taken advantage of, was gone. I had come out of the experience stronger, wiser, and more capable of recognizing what I truly deserved in life. I think I finally believe that, I said, squeezing her hand. I'm ready to stop looking back. It's time to really start living again. Emily leaned in, her voice soft but steady. And I'll be right here with you. In that moment, I realized that my story wasn't one of betrayal or revenge anymore. It was a story of resilience, of finding love again. Not just with someone else, but with myself. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger than ever. I had faced the pain head-on, dealt with the fallout, and rebuilt my life piece by piece. And now, with Emily by my side and a bright future ahead, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but sometimes, the unexpected turns can lead to something even better than you imagined. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Your journey isn't over, and neither is mine. Let's face the future together, one step at a time.